So Joe Biden had an interview with Lawrence O'Donnell, and he made a really interesting, he said something very interesting. He says that basically he knew all of the WMD stuff was fake. Now, let's see what he says about his vote, his very, a vote that haunts him forever, which is his vote for the Iraq War, which ended up leading to the deaths of 200,000 U.S. civilian or Iraqi civilians.
Look, the reason I voted the way I did was to try to prevent a war from happening because, remember, the threat was to go to war. The argument was because Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. So he said that I need to be able to get the Security Council to agree to send in inspectors to put pressure on Saddam to find out whether or not he's producing nuclear weapons. And at the time, I said, that's your reason. All right, I get it. That was the rationale was that's the way to not go to war because I didn't believe he had those nuclear weapons. I didn't believe he had those weapons of mass destruction. And you may remember the debates we had after that period about when Colin said, anyway. So that was the rationale. Mm-hmm. What happened was we went in, determined that they hyped what in fact was occurring. They didn't, there was no concrete proof of what he was doing, and they still went to war. And the irony of all ironies is the first thing that Barack Obama did when we got elected president and vice president was turn to me and say, end the war, not a joke. You run the deal to bring out 150,000+ combat troops from Iraq. And I did. So, the idea that I took the word of a president saying that he wasn't going to go to war, and this was a way to avoid going to war, was in fact a mistake. It was a mistake. I've acknowledged that 15 years ago. But the idea that Bernie Sanders' judgment on foreign policy is superior to mine, I find I'm anxious to debate him on that question.
He literally voted against the Iraq War. You voted for it. So that's easily the most important foreign policy decision easily of the past 20 years. All right, and it's not even close. The Iraq War resulting in the deaths of 200,000 civilians. Bro, think about how many people, innocent people, that is 200,000. Think about that number and then truly try to comprehend how many people that is. And by the way, that's a conservative estimate, all right? That's a conservative estimate of 200K. So some of them go up to 1 million, although I think that number is a little bit inflated. But trust me, dude, the fact that 200,000, so don't try and act like, oh, it's not this big deal. It's easily the biggest foreign policy move of the past 20 years, hands down. But what's really interesting about this is none of what he just said really made any sense. I really had to watch it a couple of times to really even understand what he's trying to say. So he's saying, I voted for the war not because I wanted to go to war. I knew that I was trying to pressure them, or we were trying to pressure Saddam Hussein to give up his weapons. So I voted for the war, but just to threaten him. I didn't actually want to go to war because I knew they didn't have the weapons. So if that's the case, you're a moron, because why would you vote for authorization for a war that you don't believe they should go to a war for? All right, let's say that really happened. Don't authorize a war that you believe you shouldn't be going to war for. You don't hand off the power to the president, especially when you're talking about George W. Bush, oil kingpin, right? You don't hand off authorization to him to go to war because you trust he's going to do something right. If that's the case, right, we're being charitable here, you should not be president because I can't trust you. You're a fucking moron. You're an idiot, dude. Think about how much of an imbecile you have to be to hand off authorization to oil kingpin George W. Bush to go to Iraq, all right? But this was getting really bad because he kept saying that, like, I opposed the war right afterwards, right after I voted for it. And it was like, no, it got so bad, CNN, mainstream corporate media, okay, this is how bad his lying was getting for a while. They literally had to check him on this, and so CNN basically explained that Biden supported the war. As CNN's K-File team explained in detail, Biden did not oppose the war from the beginning. He repeatedly expressed support for the war as a Delaware senator, though he did, as the campaign said, criticize Bush for how he handled the diplomacy, the conduct of the war, and the pre-war intelligence. Biden did call his 2002 vote a mistake beginning in 2005, but he endorsed the invasion right before and after it occurred, did so again in public remarks later in 2003, and continued to argue in 2004 that the U.S. should keep up the fight in Iraq. All right? To speaking on CNN on March 19, 2003, the day the war began, Biden acknowledged Democrats' frustration with Bush's diplomatic efforts, but said, I think it's time we stop all that. We have one single focus, and that is we're about to send our women and men to war. The president is the commander-in-chief. We voted to give him the authority to wage that war. We should step back and be supportive. He also said there's a lot of us who voted for giving the president the authority to take down Saddam Hussein if he didn't disarm, and there are those who believe at the end of the day, even though it wasn't handled all that well, we still have to take him down. So Biden was doing this weird flip-floppy stuff where he was saying like, oh, you guys are hyping it up, and then simultaneously coming out in support for the war. So it's like, that is the biggest takeaway I have from this, is Joe Biden has been a moron his entire life. That's my take, because, or maybe post-double aneurysm, he's been a dummy, because the explanation you just heard is so incredibly mumbled and very hard to follow. He literally said he voted to give authorization to Bush because he believed that authorization, which it would only actually go to war if there were weapons found, he thought that would prevent a war with Iraq. All right, you're giving authorization to George Bush, W. Bush, oil kingpin, and Dick Cheney. All right, you're giving them authorization to go to war when they're, fluffing stuff. And then you say, they're fluffing stuff, but you vote for it anyways. And then he's also lying on top of that, because obviously he was supporting the war, a couple years after. So he's lying about that too. But even if we take out the lie portion, the guy is the dumbest person I've ever heard in my life. Who the fuck gives George W. Bush authorization to go to the Iraq war because you trust him? I would not vote for somebody who trusted George W. Bush on literally anything.